before you can grow, before you can get those stretch assignments, you do have to create a comfortable environment for your folks. Because think about it. If I'm trying to read or learn something, right? I go to my local Starbucks, I sit down on my laptop, I get my favorite latte. What am I doing? I'm making my environment comfortable for me to take on the learning that I'm about to do. And so it's the same thing with employees. You have to create a space where they feel comfortable. The term we use now is psychological safety, but it's really the same thing because you want to make sure that they're able to be vulnerable. They're able to ask questions. They're not afraid to make mistakes. So I do use the word comfortable, and that's the environment that you need to create. And very good companies and good leaders have a plan of culture to create this. Once they do that, now they can have the growth that they're talking about.
Welcome to the Chad Carden Podcast, where people and culture make all the difference. Our guests are real leaders that are making real impact by creating even better cultures and even better results. We're going to talk about things that most people aren't talking about. We're going to talk about things that leaders are thinking but might be scared to say. We're going to get into issues that can give you practical and tactical ways to set you up for a higher probability of success. Let's get after it. Hey, welcome to another episode. Today we have a special guest, Richard Fisher, who is with us. And I'm excited to have this conversation with Richard for a couple reasons. One is just to learn more about the space that he's in. I think it's unique, but we also had a chance to talk prior to, and I'm really excited that he shares the same vision that I do of, if you can impact and improve the performance of people, it really helps drive results. And I know a lot of leaders today struggle with that, and there's a lot of noise. So I'm hoping Richard can give us some good insights on, how do you cut through all that and really cut through the BS and really get down to the brass tacks of what a leader needs to know and needs to be doing to be successful. So Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chad. Great to be on. Super excited. Some of the topics that we talked about before, I love the conversation. It's such a unique industry that we have and that I'm into. And you can see how just the customer experience is changing, the way that we're connecting with people, just the path that we're on. And there's so many variables that are coming into the retail space right now. But it's amazing the transformation over the years that I've been in. I've been in leadership now almost 3 decades. And so with 3 different big box retailers. So it's just amazing to see where we're going, how we treat associates, how that relates to the customer experience. And there's just a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I know, and I'm looking forward to it. Let's start here. Why don't you give us a foundation of sort of your background and how you got into leadership, but maybe even more importantly, how your leadership approach kind of took shape, right? I mean, I know that over the years you've kind of evolved and, you have certain non-negotiables, I believe, which is why I'm happy to have this conversation on how to be an effective leader, but kind of walk us through that journey and how you arrived to where you are today.
Yeah, so great question. Starting, and I'll go way back, like right out of
Yeah.
college, I had some friends and worked for a manufacturing company that was local, right? Everybody had worked there. And I was there for about 6 months, didn't really know what I wanted to do in terms of my career from there, just getting out of school. And I was there for, a little while, and everybody lost their job because the company packed up and they were moving, and I went to my leaders and said, hey, what happened here? And they started to break down like our business and say, just our expenses, what it costs to operate here. We're moving this right to other places. And it was my first sense of, man, I have zero control right now of my future in this job. And I felt like at the time, like I could do things better, right? I could create a better experience. And so this was really early for me. And then as I went to my first company for supply chain, when I went to Ace Hardware, they were in a transformation and needed a whole bunch of new leaders. I had some good experience. I was, recently a coach, doing some leadership. And so got in early there. And then from there, really started to understand business, connection with people, and really just the retail industry in general. And so that's where I started to move into this space.
Yeah, and as your leadership journey evolved, did you have mentors? Was it just trial and error, learn, kind of just jumping into the fire? Because I mean, you said you have 3 decades of this, and the evolutionary process is interesting to me. How did you kind of establish some of those key leadership principles that you believe are needed to be successful?
Yeah, I tell everybody like I'm a blue collar leader, right? I get my hands involved. I dive into things. If there's a problem, right? I want to know the details, the intangibles. So I did a lot of really kind of self-discovery, learning by trial. I took a ton of leadership courses. I have like over 20 certificates from different Dale Carnegie courses. I did have some good mentors along the way, but really was a self-educator, right? A little bit different than today's world of the white collar sort of MBA, right? That I have some schooling and education from university, but really did a lot on my own, understand, where I wanted to go. And I'm a super competitive guy, right? So in that space, I always felt like, boy, I can create a better experience here. Here's things that I would do differently. And so on my journey, I just continued to learn. I was one of the folks that when I went to Ace Hardware, actually, I volunteered for everything, Chad, every new system, every technology, every shift. I said, "Yep, I'll go and be in transportation, right? I'll go and learn the new WMS system. I'll go and learn how meet with our retail folks and go to the store and understand how's that customer experience." So I really just dove into everything, and just found that I had a great knack for just the industry, the connection with people, and then how I could use those skills, right, to just create a better experience.
Yeah, there's a couple things in there that I think are vital for the audience. Oh, and again, if I'm putting words in your mouth, let me know. But a couple things is one is today's leader or just today's individual, right? No matter if you're just getting started you maybe have some some tenure in your space, you have to be proactive. You cannot wait for people to, and that's what you did, right? You went out, you looked for opportunities to learn. You also were proactive in getting involved and engaged, and like you said, you volunteered for everything. So I think number one is people, and again, if I'm wrong here, Richard, let me know. But I mean, you have to be proactive. You can't wait and go, well, they need to, I'm waiting for them for guidance, or I'm waiting for somebody to kind of teach me. You have to really be proactive, because if you don't, you're going to get left behind. Fair to say?
Yeah, 100%. Right. Everybody's fighting for the next customer, right? The next opportunity. And in order to do that, like you have to be ahead of the curve, which is very difficult to do, but you almost have to understand like, where are my customers going next? Right. We talked about like the omni-channel experience and, companies changing from brick and mortar to online and having a balance and depending on and where they have to meet those customers. But if you're not thinking about what's next, you're going to be left behind.
So that's one. So the mindset always has to be, which kind of leads me into the second point that I gathered from what you were saying is you've been doing this 3 decades, but I think it's also the mindset that and again, I buy into this too, is that we've never arrived, right? Like there's always opportunity to learn. There's always opportunity to evolve. And once you think you've kind of arrived, that's when I believe you settle in and you begin to get complacent and you actually begin to go backwards in what you're trying to accomplish. Fair enough?
Fair enough, for sure. And I think the key here, and we talked about this a little bit, as I'll tell a little bit of a story here, is you have to have all of those plans and that proactive approach with your culture, right? Everybody has a 3-year business plan, a 5-year business plan, where we're growing to, right? But not many people talk about what is my culture plan for the next year, or 2 years or 5 years? What is my retention plan? What are the action steps I'm doing to create this amazing environment for my associates? We talked about comfort last time,
Yeah.
right? And so the companies that are great with this they have a plan of culture, just like they do with operating expense, business growth, anything else that they have. And so they're working those plans, and it's very different for them. And I think one of the things, and why I used that word when we talked about comfort was, if you just think about if I want to learn something, right? Everyone talks about you have to be uncomfortable, right, to learn, because there's no comfort in the growth zone. There's a little bit of truth to that, but I think the difference, and I think what good leaders and good companies understand is before you can grow, before you can get those stretch assignments, you do have to create a comfortable environment for your folks. Because think about it, if I'm trying to read or learn something, right? I go to my local Starbucks, I sit down on my laptop, I get my favorite latte. What am I doing? I'm making my environment comfortable for me to take on the learning that I'm about to do. And so it's the same thing with employees. You have to create a space where they feel comfortable. The term we use now is psychological safety, but it's really the same thing because you want to make sure that they're able to be vulnerable, they're able to ask questions, right? They're not afraid to make mistakes. So I do use the word comfortable, and that's the environment that you need to create. And very good companies and good leaders have a plan of culture to create this. Once they do that, now they can have the growth that they're talking about. Now they can take these individuals and they can give them stretch assignments because they're able to perform at a different level. But a lot of places, Chad, do this backwards. They're like, we have to keep up with our customers. We have to grow so fast. Okay, here's 17 initiatives, but we haven't created the foundation for them to be able to do that stuff.
Yeah, I remember this conversation because, you sort of turned the thought process over on its head, and it really produced thought for me. And I appreciate that, which, I always think, to grow, you have to be outside your comfort zone, which, like you mentioned, there is probably some truth to that. And it's probably not an absolute on either side. But at the same time, you have to create that comfort for your people to learn and to involve and to evolve into what that is. I think that that's such an such a great insight because just candidly, I don't always think that way, right? I always think, hey, we got to get outside our comfort zone. We got to stretch our people, which, yes, again, we could, don't need to belabor that point. But at the same time, you have to create that comfortable environment so people feel, like you mentioned, the vulnerability, or it's okay to go through a learning process where, you might be putting yourself out there, but together we're going to learn on this journey and set ourselves up for success.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. Because just think of the spectrum, right? We started, when I started in supply chain and leadership, right? Old school was top down, right? I say it, you do it, whatever the CEO says, right? And you're just driving everything to the bottom. And then, not long after, quickly, servant leadership came out, right? And we flipped the triangle. And everyone said, hey, no, they actually have the answers at the bottom. So it's probably somewhere in between. Um, but what I found in my experience is if you don't create the comfort zone for them to want to do that, right? That's where the discretionary effort comes in. That's where you get people that go above and beyond. And that's where you get associates, right, that love their job. And so they want to do more for the company. And so we have this just spectrum that's kind of gone from one tier to the other. Somewhere in between, it's better. But I found that the more comfortable you can create that environment, the more they're vulnerable and open. And then they can take on those additional assignments.
Yeah, that's such a good insight. The other thing that you mentioned there, which I think people deal with all the time, and I want you to kind of go into this a little bit, is you mentioned that a lot of times we're thrown 20 different initiatives, right? Or we got to move fast and we got to do this and the world's evolving. And yeah, that's the case. But I think there's a difference between those things coming at you and being able to manage those things in a way that still allow you to be productive, efficient, and effective. So, we might not be able to turn off the spigot, right? It might still be coming at us, but how do you as a leader, maybe be the shield or the funnel for your people to say, okay, yeah, we got to spin 100 plates, but how do we stay focused on those 3 to 4 high priority items that allow us to really move in the right direction? Give us some insights for that, because I think leaders struggle with that daily.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I use the term all the time. We have to slow down to move fast. And you talked about it earlier, is you really need to have a mapped out plan, right? Understanding the simple fact of what's the goal, right? What's the journey we need to take to reach those goals? And then how do we do that? And how do we bring our people along on that journey? And so it's competing priorities, but it starts with what's going to impact my associates how is that going to impact our customers, right? And then how is it going to impact the bottom line? So I do believe you need to start in going that order because most companies, again, do it the other way. They
Yeah.
start, let me just change my bottom line. So we need a new app, right? We need to speed the customer to change by 2 days. And again, they're not in position to do that, nor are their leaders or their team. And so I think first it's designing and making sure that you have the associate impact and how they're going to go through that journey, right? And then you understand how will that impact the improvements I need for my customer experience. Okay, that's going to now impact my bottom line by X. And so it's walking through those steps, but you do have to start with the employee first
Yeah.
and then do those in a very specific order.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier too. It's about you have to create that foundation because if you don't have that foundation, the walls are going to crumble. And so many people do get that backwards, right? Because it's so about the bottom line, bottom line. Well, if they just and again, not saying you have to take years to do this, but if you just take a little bit of time in up front to build it the right way and create those anchor points, it creates so much more long-term dividends or long-term payouts. If I do it the wrong way, it just creates long-term headaches, right? And I just continuously reinvent.
Yeah,
Um,
it's short term, right? It's
yeah,
short term success versus long term. I can probably get there in 6 months to a year, but it's not going to be sustainable, right? So
right.
if I do it, if I just pause a little, have better planning, right, and get my team involved to move forward, then I can sustain that long term.
Yeah. You talked about this in the beginning, but I think you've been in your career in the retail space, you've been in three big boxes and you've seen different cultures. And you also mentioned that the retail space is ever changing, right? Probably changing at lightning speed. Talk to us a
Sure.
little bit about what's happening in the industry where because you're at Crate and Barrel right now, correct? Yeah. So what's
Correct.
happening with it? How is Crate and Barrel evolving and how are you guys evolving? Those are just interesting insights on this podcast, as we mentioned kind of when we talked earlier, is I have the luxury of sitting in a seat that gets to see a multitude of spaces, right? A multitude of verticals.
Yeah.
And the retail space fascinates me because I know it's, like again, years ago it was malls and brick and mortar, and now it's, the game's changing. So tell us some of the things that are happening currently in the space and what are you guys doing to evolve?
Yeah, great question. So specifically in my industry, right, the furniture industry, there's a couple of key things. And the first one that all customers want is sustainability. They want eco-friendly product, right? So there's a ton of work with our vendors to make sure that we are getting custom product, right? We're using recycled materials. And so, everybody who now customers want to purchase something, they want to feel good about it and they want it to be designed for them, right? So there's a lot of custom furniture now. It's not something you can get on every corner store, but it's something that, hey, this is unique to me. It's a different experience. And I want something that's eco-friendly so I can feel good about my purchase and I'm giving back. The second thing that's big in the industry right now is personalization. So everything is getting personalized. Again, they can pick out very unique colors, concepts. They can shop by room, right? They can look all over the place and have somebody design, like design services now is really high. A lot of these changes came from the pandemic where everyone said, I can't go outside, right? So I'm going to create my own amazing experience at home. But those are two things that are really impacting the industry. And then the third is just digital commerce, right? Online shopping is off the charts. It's unbelievable how every year, even 10 to 20% in some different industries that we're seeing, and up to like 60% of sales for companies are online. And so they're trying to make sure that they have, again, a good digital experience. They have a great app, right, that people can flow through quickly. They have a returns process. But those are three things in my industry right now that are just trending like crazy.
And what are some of the things that you guys are proactively doing to elevate you to the top, right? Because I'm sure it's a highly competitive space like anything else. What are some of the things that you guys have been doing to create that experience and to create that eco-friendly? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, working with our vendors, our suppliers, right, to making sure that we are getting the right material, the right costs, the right prices. And again, which is probably a whole podcast, is tariffs, right? So that's another
Yeah.
challenge that comes into play. But working with, our suppliers and vendors, seeing what we can make even in the States, right? And really managing that process and flow to help our customers have a better experience. We're always looking at speed, right? How quickly can we get it to them? How can we cut down on that time? Especially when you're talking, Crate does a lot of custom furniture, which takes time, right?
Yeah.
That can be anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks or longer, depending on the size, depending on what you get, and if you're shopping a whole room, right? That could take some time. So we're working with our suppliers as well to see how can we cut that down. How do we maintain more inventory in stock, right? In our stores, in our supply chain, right? And then how quickly can we move it if we're strategically placed, right, throughout the company? So there's been a ton of work around the back end of supply chain to get it to the front end of the customer.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, if I want customized stuff, I have to give up a little bit of time, right? My speed to getting it. I mean, it's hard to get both. I know you guys try to service that way, but at the same time,
Right.
it's not something that, especially as you mentioned, if I want to create and be able to really put my kind of stamp on it, that takes time, and so I think that's kind of that balance of positioning it with the customers. Fair to say.
Fair to say, for
All
sure.
right. So let's get into a couple things on the leadership front. Now, think about a new leader or a leader that's trying to find his or her footing in leadership. What would be some of Richard's best practices in two spaces? Let's go. I'll give you both of them, but we'll start with the first one. One is, what are some things that you would coach a new leader to focus on that would create a good team member experience, right? Create a fulfillment, create engagement, create that they, mentally they made the right choice. They enjoy working in their space. They enjoy working with others in their space. What are some of the elements that you would coach us on there? And then the second piece is, how do you stay sane as a leader, right? So how, you're always worried about your people. What are some things that you do to make sure, your tank is full so you can show up to be at your best? Let's kind of start with the first one, and then we'll dive into the second one.
Yeah, sounds good. So my top 5 tips for leaders, right, are the first thing you do when you come in to an environment is you have to remove negative employees. Plain and simple. You have to eliminate those that are slowing things down, that are not adding to the culture. And I even talk about this when we hire people or when we're bringing somebody in. What's the fit going to be for culture? Will they enhance the culture or not? If the answer, Chad, is no, they won't enhance it. And they might be a great interview, but if they're not going to enhance the culture, they're out. I don't bring them in. So the first thing I do is make sure, assess the environment, and we have to remove obstacles, any negative employees.
Okay, hold
The
on, hold on.
second thing is,
Hang on. This is good. This is good. Give me a second. Okay, because so many times we allow the wrong people to stay on the bus, right? And we justify it, and we do that. But that is I hate it's overplayed, but it's like a cancer that will just continuously spread. And what leaders don't really realize is that it really infects your top producers, because your top producers get frustrated. They're like, why is Chad still on this bus, right? He's not. And it's, again, I might not be a bad person. It just might not be the right fit. And you mentioned fit earlier. And so I think that is so valuable. We could stop there, but I mean, you have 4 more and I want to hear them, but it's like that right there will lighten the load and create, and it's almost like, just have the courage to do it, because 4 months down the road, you're going to look and say, that was the best decision I made. And I also believe, I can't prove this, but I also believe that the person that you got off the bus will say, that was the best thing for me too, because it wasn't right for them at the same time. So I
yeah,
just want to double click on it, because I think that's so powerful.
yeah, you're spot on, and I think the key is again thinking about the masses. But the one person that you got off the bus, 4 more people just got on, right? And so, and that's the difference. And trying to quantify that, it is massive. You can put dollars to it and say we already know what we learned from turnover, right? And how many dollars from bringing somebody on in training. But there's just so many people that get back on the bus, and then it's endless. So that
Okay.
is a non-negotiable for me.
Awesome.
Yep.
Love it.
Yeah, number 2 is purpose. Why are you there? Like, what do you do? Like, what's your goal, right? Where are we striving for? And it can be a company mission, but for me, it's, your own vision of where you see your team going. Company missions, a lot of times, right? They're too long. There's a lot of things. Some people read them and I'm like, I don't even understand what that means, right? So I think it's being human to say, hey, here's where I'm going and here's the simplicity of it. And I want you guys to be on board, right? And so that's number two for me.
Okay.
Um, yeah, three, transparency, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. Hey, I tried this, guys. I messed it up. It wasn't a great decision. Here's what we need to do to fix it. And so just be honest, right? And that's, you take ownership of some of your mistakes, right? And then obviously when you have successes, it's great, but just be transparent in the direction at where you're going, and whether things are good or bad. Number four is allow people to make mistakes because that's where they really learn. So it's okay. So don't have policies and processes in place where every time somebody, makes a tiny mistake, you're right to coaching and corrective action. It's okay to have that conversation, but there needs to be an initial sort of document to say, hey, here's where this went wrong. What did you learn from it? So I actually like to use, I'm a golfer, so I like to use a bounce back stat, right? So if anybody who's been golfing, bounce back, right, is you bogeyed or double bogeyed, and now you come back and make a birdie, right? So you increase by 3 strokes. So I look at folks that made a mistake, maybe leaders that made a mistake that cost us, right, some money, and it could be a bad hire, right? It could be an operational decision, but then you look the week over week of the next month and see how did they bounce back, right? What did they learn from that situation? If I get better bounce back return, I know they're learning. So one of my tips is allow people to make a mistake because then they'll learn. And again, it'll create some of that comfort so that
Right.
they'll tell you when they do something wrong, right? Because most places people don't want to say anything, right? Something's wrong and they don't share that. And then the last one is back to create comfort for people, right? Create that psychological safety, create an environment where they want to come to work, right? They want to be there. And that one sounds cliche, but I would challenge any company to say, let me go in and talk to your employees. And on Sunday, do they want to come to work on Monday morning? And if most of them the answer is no, I'd say then you're not creating right that comfort that allows them to bring their best self to work. So those would be my top five.
And I think I'm aligned with all five of them. Let me ask you this question. Now, I will also say, and you've been in the space for, 3 decades. I've been doing it for 2.5 decades. Those five things seem really simple. And I don't mean simple in a negative way. I mean, they seem like that's what every leader should do. However, those things are not present in a lot of companies, in a lot of leaders with their teams. Why do you think that leaders have such a hard time anchoring those five best practices in? What would you say is some of the challenges?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it goes back to some of those competing priorities that you were talking about, right? We're not in a space, so we throw all these objectives because even CEOs want to move so fast. You hear them. We need to move at the pace of our customers, right? At the pace of that experience that we want to create, at the pace of technology, which right is changing. It seems like every month something's new. So I think they struggle to understand and keep their focus down to core fundamentals, which is working with your people, right? Aligning, which is almost, again, doing it backwards, right? It's servant leadership. If I create that environment, if I'm coaching and helping develop them, if there's trust and transparency, I will get results on the other end. So I still think a lot of companies struggle. The pressure of bottom line profitability, right? Of probably board members and CEO, all those pressures, I think, trickle down and then they get in the way of this, of leadership, really sticking to core fundamentals.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that there's, the priorities, as you mentioned, are potentially mixed. I would also say that I think sometimes, and not saying it crate and barrel or anything or what you're doing, but I think sometimes too, we just throw leaders in there and we just expect that they would know how to do this, right? We expect that they just all of a sudden you've elevated, you were really good at what you did. It's almost like you're a really good player. Now we elevated you to coach. Well, just because you're a good player doesn't necessarily make you a good coach, right? And so you have to give people an opportunity to evolve and have the right skills and abilities and attitudes and knowledge to be successful. And then we get mad at them when it's like, well, what happened? Right. So, and maybe you don't see that currently, but in your career, have you seen that where sometimes you just get thrown in the deep end?
I see it a ton. We used to, joke a little bit where you'd get your badge and you were knighted, right? And now you're off, right? And it's like now that you have that, you're expected to have answers and know exactly where to go and how to get your team there and stuff. So you're 100% right. I think, again, it goes back to the fit. I think the skill set. I think it goes back to also companies um, putting stock in training development. Every place I've been at, you hear that as a crutch, right? Like there's no development here. There's not a ton of training. We get some, right? But again, not at the pace of how we want people to move. So you're 100% right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I always say leadership would be easy if people weren't involved, right? So I mean, so leaders understanding how to work with people, everybody's different, how to meet them where they're at, even moving from peer to leader, right? I mean, at one time, if we were a peer and now I'm leading that group, I mean, all those dynamics play a role, which you have, over 3 decades have figured out along the way because you were proactive, like you mentioned earlier. You took a lot of initiative to understand those things. But a lot of times leaders are just kind of thrown in there and it's like, what the hell do I do? Which again, it's almost like unconscious for you, right? You know how to read and react and do those things. But some people, they're still learning these things and they're still learning the ropes. So that's interesting. Let's go to that second piece of that. And we don't need to necessarily get too deep, but I am interested, like, how do you stay level? What are some of the things that you do? Because it's easy to get freaking burnout and kind of lose the way every day with all the noise. So give us some tips or thoughts on things that leaders can do to, stay on the level.
Yeah, that is really a great question, and it's tough because at times, right, we talk, amongst my peers and colleagues, right, I have in the industry and say it can be lonely at the top, right, because there's only so many people you can talk to, and so as you're going through it, it really is about putting the right pieces together, working with your team in collaboration, right, so that you're not just taking on the burden, right? It's really has to be sort of distributed and then make sure that each component of your business, your operation, right, can take the piece that they have to get them going in the same direction. I get this question all the time. What is the hardest part about your job? Right? And we service, 43 stores. I handle most of the Northeast corridor from Virginia all the way up to Maine in terms of e-com and home delivery and retail space, right? So there's a ton of complex activity. And when I get that question all the time, it's people. It's getting everybody to go in the same direction. And so for me, it's just a ton of collaboration with your leaders, really to break down everything and understand what space they need to be in, what space I need to be in, and being able to identify, I think with my experience, right, and experienced leaders, identify the places where I need to be, spend my time, and where I don't need to be. And so that's a key for me so that you can delegate what you need to, you can coach and mentor, but that you can assess that everybody's going in the same direction. And that there's progress in all the areas that you need, but it comes down to having the right team and be able to use all of your resources collectively. Because again, we always talk about the best leaders. Like, I'm hoping I'm not the smartest guy in the room, right? I want my team to be able to understand, and they're the experts. And then together, right, we can get to the same place. So it is a collaboration of us understanding each other and then knowing, how we need to support one another. So you don't have to take that burden of everything on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, again, these are my words, not yours, but I think leaders need leverage should be a word that's your best friend, right? How am I leveraging, not manipulating, but how am I leveraging the town around me? How am I leveraging the people? How am I setting them up for success? And you mentioned it, which again, I've heard a lot of great leaders mention, which is, how do I distribute? What's that weight distribution? Because if all the weight's on my shoulders, it gets heavy. But if I can weight distribute and kind of leverage the team around me to kind of maximize and collaborate, you get a lot more done. The other thing that you mentioned, which is interesting, is lonely at the top. I was touring a large hospital, and the CEO was touring me, and she was very happy of all the culture that they built and the things that they did. And this is a specialty hospital in St. Louis, and they do some amazing work with kids that have major challenges. And the environment that they created was just crazy. And it was like a 2-hour tour, Richard, of this whole thing. And she was giving her teams credit and all this different type of stuff. Then we went back up to her office. And when we went back to her office, she sat down behind her desk, and it's almost like she became a different person. She took a big, deep breath, and she just kind of slumped in. And I go, hang on, you're different here than what you were out there. And here's what she said. Like you mentioned, she goes, sometimes I just wonder who takes care of the caretaker, right? Because leaders are always giving. They're always, if you're a good leader, right, you're always giving of yourself, and you're always worried about your people. But you also have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Because if you're not at your best, I always say this, it's hard to be at your best. And some of those things. So weight distribution, and also it seems like you have a good potential group of peers that you maybe bounce ideas off of. But I just think that's valuable, that leaders have to get selfish, not selfish in a negative way, but sometimes selfish in making sure that, I'm okay, so I can serve the way I want to serve to the people that, I work with.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to answer your question a little deeper. Is one, my favorite thing to do is say no. So at times where I just can't take on something else, another challenge, right? It's like, hey, we're full right now. Here's all the projects. I actually have 4 projects that I'm working on now, besides what we're doing here to expand the network. But I can't take on anything else because I won't be able to service you in the right way. So at times when I do that, I know my plate's full. There's a lot I'm doing, and so I evaluate that. And so sometimes it's good to just say, hey, no, I can't do that because I won't give you the service or experience that you need. I think the other thing is to take breaks throughout the day. And I mean, I have engagement walk on my calendar, right? So where I go out and I don't talk about work, I go and talk to associates, talk to my leaders, like they're my neighbor, right? And I see them. And so that gives me energy, and it gets me away from the world, the pressures, right? The budgets, the expenses, all of those things, just to engage in what their day is like. And that can be therapeutic if you do that. And so I have it on my calendar. And so I go every day. I have time where I'll spend 30 minutes and I'll just walk and talk to people about anything and everything that's happening in their lives, just to engage a little bit and see how I can support. And so you do have to take some breaks away from the world, so to speak. And that's one way to do it for yourself. And then I think it's key to have on there, even if it's 30 minutes, to have your own learning, right? Hey, I have 30 minutes because I want to listen to a podcast, right? Or I want to research, or I want to do a LinkedIn learning course, right? Just on something that maybe is challenging for my leaders, right? That I say, you know what? Let me review this again and get some tips for them on how to manage conflict, right? Because they're struggling to have those really good coaching conversations. So I think it's your team, how you use them, collaborate together. I think it's stepping away, right? And having those engagement walks, right? You can be a human and talk to them and be different. And then I think it's, understanding how you can support by doing your own learning to continue to be ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned again something that you probably just think is just unconsciously natural, but I think that's powerful, is you calendar it. Like you don't think I'm gonna get to it. I always say, if it's in your calendar, there's a higher likelihood that you're gonna hold to it, right? You're gonna stick to it. If I don't have it, I need to go out there and do a leadership walk, or I need to go out there and just do an engagement walk, as you mentioned. I probably, it's easy to push it off, but if it's calendar time, it's something to set in my calendar.
Yeah, it's great. I get up and you can get away from like a meeting or something that's going on. And I think the last thing I do want to say that I do as well is have open office hours, right? So I'll have an hour during the week where I'll just put open. Anybody and everybody can walk in, right? So they walk in, can ask me a question about the business. They can ask me about anything that's happening, right? I don't get to see all these faces every day. So it gives them an opportunity to come in and give me feedback, challenges, anything that they need. So I think it's important. And it's easy to say we have open office policy. You can come in anytime, yet most of us are on calls, right? We're in budget meetings, we're doing a lot of stuff. I did this in my last company and just put open office hours for people to come in, and it was great because they would come in with great ideas and say, "Hey, what do you think about this, Richard? I think we need to change this," or "I'm having trouble with the new technology we have for returns, right? And our RF units aren't working, or we're just having this awful time with some of these customers because our systems aren't talking to each other, so orders aren't flowing, whatever it may be." And then I can get the right partners, technology, right, our other teams together. But it's just great for them to see that there's an open time for them to come in anytime through that week and say, "Hey, let me talk to the director here and get some feedback." And it's eye opening, right? Because sometimes they'll come in just to talk to me about sports, right? And just to say hi. But it's just a great connection. And then you solve a ton of problems that you would maybe not hear, or they would build up and storm, right? And then it becomes something bigger where if they have an opportunity just to walk in and talk to me about it, right? I can solve it in the next day or hour, and now I'm moving forward.
Yeah, I think that is more present in today's world than say 20 years ago, right? Where I was just in DC earlier this week with a group of CEOs. We were doing a roundtable, and a lot of CEOs mentioned they just get out and they talk about things. They mentioned sports. There was a CEO that's big on sports. You mentioned golf. There's different things you talk about just to kind of take a break and get away from the everyday working world, I think is key. The other thing that I think you just, again, Richard, I think it's so in tune. I don't think you realize the power of this because it's just who you are. But just when people come into your office during those open office hours and give you good ideas and good feedback, and we should do this, that goes back to what you mentioned in the beginning, which is you have created a comfort for teams, for people to come in and say those things. There's a lot of people that aren't comfortable saying that to their leader, right? Because they don't feel like they have that relationship, or they feel like they're going to get, just smacked down, or it's just going to get discarded. Where you have, and I think that is such a powerful. If you just start with creating an environment of comfort, comfortable to try things, comfortable to make mistakes, comfortable to present new ideas, comfortable to work together, comfortable to, bring up difficult issues that might just be present, comfortable to get the wrong people off the bus. I think you create that comfort, and it has a lot of positive impact, kind of the ripple effect, throughout the organization.
I do want to share, I've been in companies that have done surveys, right? And then you get your score. And so, and the last company did that. We're not doing it here, but did some surveys, and I just do want to share a little bit. I've had engagement scores as high as 90, which most companies are in the 70s,
Yeah.
right? And would think, hey, if I get to 78, I'm good, and that's amazing. And so I've had leadership scores as high as 90. I've had associate scores in the mid 80s. And some of that is, I think, what people find out, and I'm fortunate, it's just kind of how I am. And I think you're probably sensing that here, is that, I'm just treat people like they're human. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but just like I'm talking to you, I talk to my leaders and associates, and I got one of the greatest compliments, just a month ago, from one of my leaders. He's like, it's so refreshing to see somebody of your stature, what you've been through, your journey, how you coach, and he's a direct report, develop. He's like, and you can have a ton of success, right? And you can be a good leader.
Yeah.
His experience was like, he used to people coming in and yelling, or they're mad, we missed this goal. He's like, it's awesome to see that you can do it a different way. And so I used to joke when I was back at Ace, and I was there for a long time and then left for some growth stuff. But I said, yeah, I was kind of like the Jerry Maguire of leadership at that time, right? Because I always felt like it needed a personal touch. And so you're right. Some of this stuff for me, I feel fortunate that it's a little bit natural for
Hmm.
me just to talk to people, right? I come from a good family, an environment that was very friendly and helpful. And so that's just sort of who I am. So I think I have a big benefit. And yes, I've learned to be better, of course, as a leader, but the person I am fits that. And early on in my career, it was a bit of a struggle, right? Because I was sort of that people leader first, and it was built more for top driven down. So I did struggle a little bit, but I learned my way. And, I take a lot of pride in the fact that the world now is maybe in my place. So I tell people I might have been a little bit ahead of my time, but, it's helped me a lot, and I've had some, good tangible results from it. So it's great. It comes with a ton of hard work, right? And I still have to keep learning. But as I tell everybody, you have to have a plan and a strategy and actions to stay ahead. And if you're not doing that, then you're probably falling behind.
Yeah. And I want to be sensitive of time. I know we're coming down for landing, and I want to wrap this thing up. But that is so powerful when your direct report came to you, because really what I heard you saying was, one, you showed him a different way, and B, he realized you don't have to be an asshole to get results, right? Like, you can do this in a way that humanizes and works together. I'm sure we have listeners that want personalized furniture and everything. Why should how do they find you? Where should they go? And why should they go in your direction? Kind of give us that. Give us a little
Yeah,
plug.
yeah, for sure. Definitely hit your local retail store, right? You want to touch, feel, experience, and if not, design service is free. Anybody will come to your home, a room, whether it's the kitchen, sofa, they can help design anywhere. And they have layouts of, just experts that they work with. So you can pick your own comfort level, you can pick your own design. So I would say you can obviously shop online, a really great digital experience from the website and everything. But there's multiple ways to get to it, but go to your local store. Create have that experience, right? Touch and feel the material because it's different, it's custom, right? And it's not something you can get everywhere.
What's that? What is the website again? Give it to us.
Just crateandbarrel.com.
Crateandbarrel.com. All right. Listen, Richard, I super appreciate it. There is a ton of nuggets of information that I think our audience and listeners are going to gain from this. I say this to a lot of guests, and this is probably, but it is authentic and sincere. I mean, I think we could probably do another one, right? We could do another. So there might be a 2.0 coming up sometime in the near future. But I appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll catch you on the other side.
Sounds great. Thanks, Chad.